Okay, so we started a month ago, but so let's. I think it's not a bad idea to just do a quick review. We'll start as if we were as if it was the first class. I just want to make something clear when we talk about the interaction between the Torah in its broad sense and the outside world. There's all kinds of stuff that involves, and I don't think I made that clear enough in the first time we got together. It's not just can you go to college and what should you study and stuff like that. That's part of it. But there are other issues. First of all, there were issues of popular culture. The Chazal are not going to talk about going to the movies, right? And they're not going to talk about other things. What about ways of dressing and games? And there's no discussion in the poskim about Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, I don't know what people, what everybody plays now, or Minecraft. Or is Minecraft still a thing?
Yeah.
Okay. So whatever. I mean, these are things which are, because the truth of the matter is, I mean, even in general society, there's a major discussion about the influence of do video games reduce, violence, or do they induce violence? These are value issues, Never mind a question of bittul Torah, not bittul Torah. So I'm going to try to. I want to talk about. I'm going to draw a very broad, very broad canvas over the course of the year. That's number one. And in addition, we're going to find out that I'm not going to go into it in depth right this second. It'll be a little later, but. Believe it or not, the question of how do you define Torah versus everything else is going to have a very big impact on people's personal spiritual lives. Okay? Some people say, you learn Torah, sorry, I'm recording, so I'm sorry for the bang. That just means shots and poskim. Okay, there are those who would say, that learning Chumash with Rashi is, it's okay. It's not bittul Torah really. There are those who will say that learning Nevi'im and Ksuvim is right. So we have to define Torah as well.
Torah is bittul Torah.
There are those who would say that in very fine, expensive black suits and black hats. Yeah.
How?
Because you should learn Shas. That's what you're supposed to learn.
No, I understand.
The black hat yeshivas make fun. The black hat yeshivas make fun of the Hesder yeshivas on the grounds that they study Tanakh. It's not serious.
I was in Shelburne this week, which is probably the closest we're going to get to.
Right. They're right on the line.
There was a Q&A with one of the Rebbe, and someone asked what he thinks on when they should be doing their Tanakh. And he basically said, unless that's the thing in Torah that you connect to the most and you feel that that's how you learn Kediyat Hashem, just do it.
Is that like? Is that because you should already?
Never mind studying full Jewish philosophy.
Mm-hmm. Wait, is that because you should already know it? Like by?
No. There's this. I don't have to put it. This disinclination at best not to study Tanakh.
But that's like the.
I know that, but I'm telling you that we have to. So when we talk about Torah in the outside world, I gave the impression in the first session we're going to talk about what's kosher and what's not kosher in the outside world. We have to define what Torah means. All right, I'll tell you, and this is true of all kinds of stuff. I mean, I'll give you an example. About 40 years ago. It's about 40 years ago. About 40 years ago, I was living in New York, and I used to go fairly frequently to the Lower East Side, which is where all the decent Jewish bookstores were. I don't know if there's anything left at this point because Beagleisen, which is a bit. All right, there was a place called Rabinowitz. It was opposite Goldman. Those are the two places I spend most of my time. If I really wanted to schlep, I went across the street, down the street to Beagleisen, which is now in Brooklyn. Anyways, the guy who was the manager or the salesman in this Rabinowitz bookstore, which was where you could get Sifrei Kodesh and academic books, was a guy named Yaakov Elman, who later became a very famous academic because he learned Persian and he did a lot of work at Harvard and at YU on the echoes of Persian culture in the Bavli, which makes a lot of sense because they were under the Parthian and Sassanid, and they were under Persian rule. Anyways, So and he was a very fine Talmid Chacham, a very big schmoozer, and which I'm sort of naturally inclined to that kind of personality. So we're talking one day, and he says, "You know what? Why don't you?" I said, he tells me he lived in Brooklyn. So he said, I was approached recently by some guys in the Mir in Brooklyn who want to study Moreh Nevuchim. They want to study the Rambam's philosophical work, which is always sort of, dicey. Would you be willing to teach it to them? So I said, look, I don't know the book inside out, but I could teach. There are certain sections that I know well, and I'd be very happy to teach them, especially in the second section, which talks about prophecy and the creation of the world, and the second half of the third section, which talks about Tamei Mitzvah. So he said, fine. And then then we were talking and back and forth, and in the end, it turned out that logistically it just wasn't. I was living in Riverdale, which, if you know New York City at all, Riverdale's in the Bronx, and this is Brooklyn. It was just not gonna work. So I said, fine. And it didn't work out. I said, you have to find somebody else. I gave him some ideas about people he could approach, and that was that. About a year later, I don't think I was even in the store. I think I bumped into him somewhere else. And I said, by the way, whatever happened with that chaver that wanted to learn Moreh Nevuchim from the Mir? He says, well, they met together once and then they were thrown out of the yeshiva. Ta-da. Okay, so defining what Torah means is so we're going to start in very broad, in a very sort of like undefined way by going through these discussions in the Medrash and the Gemara about what should you spend your time with and what's the purpose of what's the purpose of a person or what's a person's goal and purpose in life. But that also is going to require some discussion. Okay, let's go back to the various things that we looked at, and I'll try to summarize what we saw. So we started off with a passage from the Sifrei, which is the halachic medrash, the medrash Tanaim on it's on both Bamidbar and Dvarim, on the parsha of Kriya Shema v'dibarta bam. Okay, asem ikar va'al tasem tefillah. Now this is on the assumption now, but the dibarta bam appears twice, right? And you know what? I'm trying to remember if that's true or not. So we don't know. So it's I don't know if he's talking about the first parsha or the second parsha, but it doesn't matter. The dibarta bam asem ikar va'al tasem tefillah. So the first formulation is your major focus in terms of your studies, of your intellectual activity, should be Torah, va'al tasem tefillah. Up to here, don't make them secondary. Ikar and tafel. You're familiar with the expressions. Most people know it from most people who don't live in Hebrew in the world of Hebrew know them in terms of hilchot brachot. So famous Ikar and tafel to Mishnah and brachos. So that's one of these famous situations in which famous questions in which you're asked, is there any circumstance under which, for example, you could eat? You could say the shahakol would beat out a borei mizonos. So the famous example is, it's a very Lithuanian example, if you're eating herring. Okay? The reason why you put herring on a cracker is not to eat the cracker. The cracker is there to break or to absorb some of the salt in the herring. So for when you're in that situation, you say shahakol on the herring and the cracker gets schlepped along. The point is that's Ikar and Tafel. But here we're talking about something a lot more serious, that your Torah study should be your central focus. But that means up until this point, it means what? It means that there is something that could be Tafel.
Something else.
Right. In other words, when you learn a medrash, this is something we make a mistake doing. With the same precision and the same care and the same caution with which you'll look at a sugya or look at Rashi, or the Rambam for that matter, you've got to do the same thing with Medrashim, because the same care went into maximizing the meaning of the words or the phrase, even in a midrashic context. I don't know if you ever have a chance. I don't know if they're going to put it out, but periodically there are fragments of the Rambams of the Mishnah Torah, which came from, they're pieces of the Rambam's originally notebooks, and you can see on these pieces of dimensions, right? He crosses out each other because there was no. You guys probably don't know what T-Pex is. The whiteout, right? There was no whiteout. What?
We know.
Okay, good. Some Israelis think that there's a famous band called T-Pex, headed by a guy named Colby O's. In any case, so you just see where he crosses out and things and crosses out, because if the Rambam could say it in 4 words, he wouldn't say it in 5. If he could say it in 3 words, he would say it in 4. Because precision and giving maximum import to words is really an integral integral part of Torah literature. Anyway, so there is a tefillah, but then the Medrash jumps forward and says Shelo yeh masacha umatancha ela bahem. Your discussions, your arguments, your debates should really only be in them. Now, again, this could mean one of 2 things. It could mean, really, there's nothing tafel. All right? Everything is ikar. Torah is only ikar. And that's what so I said there might be some tension between these two phrases. But the truth of the matter is, it's not necessarily so. You can read light reading. You can read and learn other things. But if you're going to go into depth, your analytic time should be in Torah. Shelo ta'arev bahem dvarim acherim kiploni. Okay? And not only that, you should not enlist other things in your Torah discussions. Now that's a very, so that's what is that? What could that possibly mean? Kiploni, I don't know to whom it's referring. I have to check out. No, obviously the person who wrote this Medrash knew who Ploni was, or the censor found something and took it out. Okay, but either of them is possible. There are Gemaras, for example, where the Gemara is clearly talking about the founder of Christianity, but the censor took it out, so it became Ploni. But you know who it was. I don't know if that's the case here. The point is, you should not. So don't include other things in them. What does that mean? That can also mean a lot of different things, which are issues. What I'm doing is using these passages to raise questions at this point. All right. What could that possibly mean? Yeah.
You know, say that Ta'aruf Bahem Devarim is actually, it's warning against kind of mixing things into Torah that are not Torah and conflating them.
Absolutely. That's exactly what he means. Okay. But what would that mean? So what does that mean? That could mean that you should never use anything outside of a narrowly conceived definition of a curricular definition in learning. Okay. That could be that. That could be it. But then the question is, when the Gemara says "Chochma b'goyim tamin," that the Gentiles have wisdom, just not Torah, that would seem to be problematic. I mean, you could study. Could you study science from a non-Jew? How about math?
Yeah, and they already say Torah, but I mean not Torah.
Correct. So, what does that mean? Rav Soloveitchik might interpret it as saying, it's one thing to use outside, wisdom and ideas and stuff from the outside in order to elucidate the Torah. Whereas the straightforward meaning of the Torah is the thing that determines what yes and what no. But you should not make the Torah dependent on outside systems of thought. Okay, what would that mean? So, for example, if I'm a not logotherapist, if I'm an Adlerian or I'm a Freudian, and I say, well, this halacha is basically dependent on a certain psychological thing, and therefore, if the psychological situation doesn't apply, so therefore I can chuck this mitzvah or something like that. All right, you're not allowed to make other. You can enlist other sources of wisdom to elucidate Torah. But to make the Torah dependent on other systems or other value systems, you can't. I mean, this has been a major point of contention, between in the Jewish world since at least the 19th century, with the beginning of Reform. If I accept, for example, an entire Western outlook, which is liberal and so on, or egalitarian, or so on, and that runs straight, headlong against the fact that even though there is a lot more room for women, for example, to find self-expression and learning and in Torah and so on, ultimately, the Torah does work with and assume that there are differences between men and women, and that certain things men can do and women can't, and vice versa, which is an anathema to regnant culture, to regnant Western thought, especially progressive thought, where there is no gender. At that point, what would you do? So that becomes the expression, or that becomes the point of conflict that you could in fact attribute to these words, meaning, if I say that the Torah says X and I accept the judgments of the Torah, even though the rest of the world says there's no difference between men and women, everybody should do the same thing because everybody's equal means identical, that would be wrong. Whereas if I say no, I can take certain aspects of the outside world and evaluate to see how could I maximize the role of women in a halachic framework to the point without violating the integrity of what the Torah seems to say in terms of the upshot of the Gemara and Masorah. That's another thing. They're two different. So al shal ta'arev could mean don't include. Take a totally sort of like very what's the word? My problem in these classes is I'm so used to lecturing in Hebrew that my English goes. And even though it's an American English, which I apologize, but still, what can I do? Either you can take a very narrow and very defensive position, or isolationist position, or you can take a situation which is a little bit more open, but in which there is a clear hierarchy of where the sources of truth are. By the way, it's also true. It's a fact that the outside world doesn't believe in truth. The idea of absolute truth, which is binding, which makes demands on you, which enforces itself on you, is again an anathema to the outside world today. Whereas the Torah comes from the source of all absolute truth. I mean, that's a serious point of contention between the worlds. So there are things which actually don't go together. But what exactly your position should be with regard to even in using the outside world and using outside culture in order to be able to expand and enhance and deepen our understanding of Torah could very well depend on what the word la'arev means. Yeah.
Is this not just basically a question of not question, but kind of the idea of fitting your ideals to Torah and not trying to fit Torah to your ideals?
Exactly. That's precisely what it is. Now, there are those who will say, well, the minute you need to use outside, outside material, you might be, that question comes up, are you impugning the Torah's self-sufficiency or not? That becomes an issue now, and this is an argument which is as old as the hills. I mean, there's a famous. It's relatively recent, but in Jewish terms. There's a famous correspondence between the Marshal, Reb Shlomo Luria, the author of the Yam Shel Shlomo, one of the great Gedolim in the 16th century, and his first cousin, whose name was Rav Moshe Isserles, whose name I'm sure you've heard. Rav Moshe Isserles was very much interested in history and in science and in philosophy. He wrote a book called Torah Ta'olah, in which he tries to merge Maimonides' philosophy with Kabbalah. It's a very interesting effort.
Paraphrases the guy in his introduction to the Haggadah.
Correct. It's the only place, it's actually the only place in halakhic literature that I know of that the guide is actually invoked. And not only that, when the Ramah invokes the guide at the beginning of the Shulchan Aruch, he's saying that this passage from the guide should infuse this. It's not a specific demurrer. Do you know what we're talking about? The first line in the Shulchan Aruch is Yitkaber ka'arik lamod baboker lavodat boro sheyehehu morer hashachar. That's the first line. That's the Rabbi Yosef Karo. And then the Ramah's first comment is, but don't be late for shul. Apparently he knew his customers. And then he goes on and says, Shaviti Hashem lenegdi tamid, and he quotes an entire passage from the Moreh Nevuchim in which he describes what's called Hanhagata Mitboded, how a person who reaches the height of Jewish spirituality should live. And that the way that you comport yourself, you know what, it's worth reading straight out. Hold on. Give me a sec. Shaviti Hashem lenegdi tamid. Hu klal gadol b'Torah. This is 1:1 in Orach Chaim. Ubema'alot tzadikim asher olchim lifnei Elokim, ki ein yeshivat ha'adam utnuotav v'asakav, v'hu levado b'veito, ki yeshivato utnuotav v'asakav, v'hu lifnei melech gadol. V'lo diburo v'hachavat piv kirtzono, v'hu im anshe beito ukrovav, ki diburo, and whether you act at home, is not the same as when you're in distinguished company. B'moshav hamelech kol shekain ki shiasim ha'adam elibo shamelech hagadol hakadosh baruch hu asher melo kol haaretz kavodo omed alav v'roeh b'maasav kemo shene'amar im yisater adam b'mistarim v'ani lo erenu num Hashem miyad yagia elav hayira v'achnaa b'fachad Hashem yitbarech u'boshto mimenu tamid. Moreh Nevuchim Chelek Gimel Perek Nun Bet. So the Rambam here is the Ramah quotes directly from the Mishnah Torah. Now it happened to be that there was a tshuva the Ramah wrote about Hilchot Treifot. Treifot, are all the defects that you find in an animal, which even though if the animal is shechted right, render the animal non-kosher. Okay, so the Ramah quoted the Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim, who quotes Aristotle about a certain biological characteristic of an animal, of a cow. The Marshal sees this and yells and sends him a letter, nasty. He's an older first cousin. I guess he can get away with it. He's nasty first thing. Who are you quoting? Aristotle, the impure, the uncircumcised. I can't figure out if he was more upset that Aristotle was uncircumcised or impure, but all right, maybe it's both. In any event, how could you quote him? He's a goy, he's a this, he's a that. And the Ramah writes back, but I was only quoting the Rambam. The Rambam did it, which is not an answer. It's not really an answer. He did it. Okay, fine. So the Rambam is greater than anybody else, so fine, get away with it. The point is that what is the Marshal is taking in the context of this passage from the Medrash, Shalot Arebem Dvrei Machirim, even quoting a medical treatise by Aristotle, which is neutral, is wrong. And the Ramah is saying, no, the Rambam didn't mean, the Rambam by definition would not have done it had not been okay, meaning that already the two possibilities of what this word la'arev means are already there, and they're before that also. So this is old thing. By the way, what does that mean? The Rambam did it. The Rambam means that that we can mean one of two things. You see, that's why this is all, food for thought. Does the Rambam mean the Ramah could mean that the Rambam does what he does because you can't understand the Torah without taking a broad brush, or using a broad canvas, or it's legitimate because if the Torah requires it to be understood, that makes it Torah.
Could it be that, not that you can't understand it without these other explanations, could it be that you don't want to, that you won't understand it?
That could be too. Okay, that's a third possibility. Absolutely. Okay, let's go further. Shema Tomar, Lamadati Chochmat Yisrael, Elech ve'elmad Chochmat Ha'umot, Talmud Lomar, Lalechet Bahem, V'lo lihipater mitocham. So now he's taking a much more restrictive view. He says, I don't know, because you can never know Kol HaTorah Kula. When they say so-and-so knows Kol HaTorah Kula, it means he knows a lot. Nobody knows Kol HaTorah Kula. All right? V'lo lipater mitocham, v'chein hu omer, hayulech alavarcha v'nezarim mitcha. Okay. That's what comes out of the Sifrei. Now, if we look at the Medrash, which we'll see is also pops up in the Gemara, we'll see that there are other sides of this debate which pop up. By the way, it is not necessarily a political or a denominational issue. Okay, so I'll give you an example. There is a wonderful book. One of the personalities one of the things about Yerushalayim is that it's just in Israel in general, but one of the things about Yerushalayim in particular is just attracts these amazing personalities, and you never know when you're going to meet them. They're not necessarily rabbis. So you can always find out, and you don't know who's who. I mean, for example, one of the most famous Daf Yomi teachers in Yerushalayim until maybe 20 years ago when he passed away was a milkman. He's a milkman in Rechavia, and he gave the Daf Yomi in a shul called Dol Rivka. I know. I remember my first time. I this is going back 54 years. I was a kid the first time, and I brought my pants to be cleaned to the dry cleaner. There was a small dry cleaner on Rehov Yafo at the time, and I wanted to clean for Shabbos, so I went to pick them up, and the guy tells me I had the ticket, and it was 4 lira 20. Okay. But some things don't change. At the time, the lira was $3.50. Was $1 was $3.50. So now the shekel is like $3.24, $3.25. It's killing everybody. Everybody who's living in any way off of dollars is getting murdered. In any case, so I said, okay, hine arba v'esrim. I gave him the money, and he says, "Ta yoda ma ze arba v'esrim?" I don't know. Sifrei Tanakh. There were 24. One of the ways to describe one of the names for the Tanakh is Kavdalet Sfarim. Now, this is the guy who runs the dry. He's the dry cleaner. He's the one who's doing this. So this is there. There are all kinds of types. Anyways, one of the now I'm going to go to a different level. One of the more really remarkable people who this city was blessed with was Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach Zatzal. He lived in Shari Chesed. He was posek. He was on the one hand he was a Chorach Haredi. On the other hand, he really belonged to the whole Machane. When he died in 1990, exactly 30 years ago, a little bit more. He died in Adar, so it's like 35 and a half years ago. 30 and a half years ago. So he, when he died, it was the biggest funeral until then that Yerushalayim had ever seen. 300,000 people. came to Levi. Now at Rav Ovadia's there were 1 million, but there, at the time it was the biggest Levi that Yerushalayim ever seen. I mean, Rav Kook's Levi, there weren't that many people. There were 10,000. There were a few tens of thousands. When Rav Moshe died, when Rav Moshe died, after Rav Moshe Feinstein died, and the Levi was here because he buried in Har Menuchot. So I think there were 100,000. But this was something like nobody had ever seen before, and Israel had never seen anything like it. So, anyways, there's a wonderful book about his life. It's 2 volumes. The first volume is better than the first volume, I think. But they're both pretty good. They're authentic. They're not Baba Mises. They're authentic stories that were double-checked, cross-checked about his personality and life. And the book that I recommend is called HaTorah HaMesamachat. Now, there's an art scroll, a geography, blah blah type of book. HaTorah HaMesamachat. When you look at HaTorah HaMesamachat, he talks about, the author has stories about all kinds of people who had connections with Rav Shlomo Zalman. And among these 300,000 people were not just Charedim from Bnei Brak. They were everybody. I mean, the whole population was represented. Why am I mentioning this? So in one of the stories in that volume, they interviewed Rabbi Lau Sr., the one who used to be the chief, well, the son was the chief rabbi too, but the Rabbi Lau Sr., who was a Talmud in Kol Torah, in Bnei Brak, in Beit V'Gam. And he told the story about how he, as opposed to many of the other kids in Kol Torah, went to go do Bagriot. He did high school extern. He did it. What do you call it? External. You have that in Britain, right? You can do an external, like a GED. And that he wasn't sure if he wanted to do physics. He thought it might be Bittul Torah. And Reb Shlomo Zalman said, "What do you mean? What do you mean? How could you say it's it shows how God runs the world? It shows all the wisdom, tremendous wisdom in the creation. How could you say it's Bittul Torah? Of course you should study that." Now, how do I know that that's the inclusion of that story in the book is one of the proofs for me that in fact this was an authentic reportage, because believe me, no Haredi reworking of Rav Shlomo Zalman's life would be included in that with that kind of story. Anyways. So the question, so maybe, you need it. It's again, this is very, very nuanced, and I'm throwing out all the possibilities because it's food for thought. All right, let's see what the Medrash says. Davar acher, ki im b'Torat Hashem chefetzo. Interestingly, the Gemara says in Avodah Zarah, ki im b'Torat Hashem chefetzo, ein adam lomeid ela b'makom shelibo chafetz. That you're really going to study. You should have functional literacy in basic Chumash and Navi and Halacha, whatever. But ultimately, people have things that are more attractive to them, they like better, and they specialize in them, and they enjoy them more. So you should enjoy. There's an element of hana. There's an element of enjoyment and intellectual enjoyment. There's nothing wrong with enjoying your learning. That's not called, exploiting the Torah. Now, on the contrary, it's a mitzvah. Torah Hashem Tamim Mamsi Mishivat Davish Eres Hashem Neman Machim Azpeti Pikudei Hashem Yishar Misam Chaylev. You should enjoy what you're doing. So some people like. Let's forget about the people who don't like Tanakh. Some people like Tanakh, and some people prefer Orach Chaim, and some people like this. I personally, it's my Shagas. I have friends that are, I grew up in the Chugim of the Talmidim of Rav Soloveitchik and General Blood Briskers. They love Kodshim and Taras. I have no head for it. Chulin is fine, certain things, whatever, Nida, but I like other things. There are other, study it, but it's not. If I had to pull a book off the shelf, and this, I'm not going to take a book about Kodshim. What's the point? The point is Kiyem b'Torat Hashem chefetzo, that you learn, you emphasize those things that you enjoy. Shekol Misha, but this Medrash doesn't explain that pasuk this way. It's a pasuk from the first parak in Tehillim. Shekol mi shosek b'Torah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu oseh lo chapatzav. Ki im b'Torat Hashem cheptzo. That if you learn, God will provide. Okay. Of course, you know there's a famous joke about my dentist told me this about himself. He was his daughter got married, and she was marrying a guy who was in a profession which was not the most lucrative profession. So I said, so why did you agree to the shidduch? So he said, because he called me God. He thinks I'm God. I said, why do you think I'm God? How do you know he thinks you're God? He says, I asked him, how are you going to make a living on what you do for a living? How are you going to make a living out of your profession? And he said, God will provide. So I knew immediately he thinks I'm God. All right. Anyway, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Amru Yisrael Lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ribono Shel Olam, Anu Rotzim Lihiyot Yigiyim B'Torah Yomam V'Layla, Aval Ein Lanu Pnai. Amar Lehem HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Kaimu Mitzvah. Okay, Ein Lanu Pnai. Okay. Now, notice. Okay, we're gonna stop. We're gonna jump to another Gemara in a minute. Ein Lanu Pnai means that ideal. There's an ideal, and there's reality. Reality is legitimate. So the Gemara, so the Medrash is going to give us a whole bunch of possibilities of what could you do in the absence of having time, because you need to make a living. What could you do to symbolically, at least, remain in learning, okay, or awareness of learning, okay? Skip to the next page. Number 4. This immediately raises the question of, talk about the outside world. The outside world is not just culture. It's not just ballet and, well, ballet is problematic. Whatever, going to symphony. Okay? It's also a question of the legitimacy of making a living. All right? That's not so. It's not so clear that being in kollel is for your whole life, anyways, is acceptable or proper. So take a look at the Gemara in Brachas, beginning of Ketzad Mevorchim. Brachas Daf Lamed Hey Amud Beis Tana Rabbanon Vasafta Deganech V'Tiroshcha V'Yitzarecha. Again, Kriya Shema. It's not for nothing that all these psukim come from Kriya Shema, because. It's not for nothing that all of these things come from Kriya Shema, because I'm already going to tell you in advance. We're going to come to it in a few minutes. There is a machloket among Rishonim. Actually, it's machloket the Gemara already. There's a machloket in the Gemara as to whether Kriya Shema is the Raisa the Rabbanan. Okay. The machlokas of Rambam and everybody else, whether Tefillah is the Raisa of the Rabbanan, but we'll leave that aside for a minute. Machlokas of Kriya Shema the Raisa of the Rabbanan. Those who say that it's a midoraisa hold that the first v'dibarta bam in the first passage of Kriya Shema refers to Kriya Shema per se, and the second one refers to Limud Torah. Okay, so that's why I raised the question of which v'dibarta bam is mentioned in that first section from the Sifrei. Okay, so that's straightforward. V'dibarta bam, it's a limo, it's a direct what's called a yalfuta. We derive a halacha d'oraisa from the pasuk. Goodbye. Others argue. This is the opinion of Shmuel in the Gemara, and there's a whole line of Rishonim that hold like this. Tosfos holds like this also. The Tosfos in most places hold like this. All the way down the line. That no, the Dibarta Bam is simply an asmachta. What's an asmachta?
It's a memory. It's a link to the pasuk.
Yeah, in asmachta is, I mean, there is a halacha, and we try to anchor it in the Torah. We try to find a place for the Torah. There are some who say that even though ultimately its level of authority is midrabanan, the Torah still, the link to the Torah gives it an extra sort of oomph. All right, in any case, there's a ritva and Rosh like that. Not important. Okay, yafeh. Most achronim follow the Shagas Aryeh, who says when they say the Kriya Shema is the Rabbanon, they don't mean that there is no obligation that it derives from the words v'dibarta bam. You following? Ella what? There is an obligation to learn Torah every single day and to focus on the Torah, but midoraisa, it doesn't matter what you study. What the Rabbanon did, at least twice a day, what the Rabbanon did was, they said, you know what? We think that in addition to whatever learning you're going to be doing, you should recite these passages morning and evening. Why? Because these passages explicitly lay out the obligations of Limud Torah. They explicitly express Kabbalat Ol Malchut Shamayim. So therefore, you're doing, when you say Krishma the Rabbanan, it's saying this specific passage is the Rabbanan. But the action you do is Midoraisa. That there is an extra mitzvah of Limud Torah in the morning and in the evening, which has to be performed in addition to your ongoing learning. Now, that means, therefore, or the one possibility, therefore, is that the proper or the essence of Limud Torah is not just, okay, put it this way. Limud Torah is any act of Limud Torah that you do, is ensconced, is enmeshed simultaneously as an act of Kabbalat Ol Malchut Shamayim. When you learn something, that's an act of accepting God's authority. Okay? Now that's important to state. That's important for me to state because that is the difference, okay, between, say, academic Jewish studies and learning. In academic Jewish studies, the Torah is treated by most as nothing other than a text that you study and you analyze with tools which are not the way that we learn our Kisvei Kodesh. When you say that for Talmud Torah to be an act, for when you're studying Kisvei Kodesh or whatever, sacred writ, to have it be an act of Kabbalah Malchut Shamayim, it has to be enmeshed, not just enmeshed. You have to find yourself in a state of mind where you're basically, it's a worshipful gesture. You're encountering God. You don't encounter God if you treat Parsha and Chumash like Wuthering Heights, or Dante. I'm a big Dante fan, so Dante Alighieri or whatever. Okay, how do you know that? What's the difference? It's really striking. I'll give you. I was going to save this for later, but as long as we're at it, there is an interesting Gemara. The Gemara in Bab Metzia goes as follows. The Gemara says that it quotes a pasuk in Yirmiyahu. Pasuk in Yirmiyahu says, "Al ma havda haaretz." Let me see if I can have it here. Let me see if I can find this. Oh, very nice. I shut off the. find the Gemara. Here it is. Amar Rav Yehuda, this is Bab Mitzia, Daf Pehei Amar Aleph, Talmud Beis. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav. My dichtiv, what does the Torah mean when it says, Mi ha'ish hachacham v'yavein zot, v'yavein et zot, v'asher diber dvar pi Hashem elav, or diber pi Hashem elav, v'yageda, alma avda ha'aretz. Okay? Who is the wise person who understands this? And the person who has received God's word, and tell us, v'yageda, why was the land destroyed? This is a pasuk in Yirmiyahu, so we're talking about the Churban Bayis Rishon. Davar zeh amru chachamim v'lo pershuhu, amru neviim v'lo pershuhu, ad shepersho HaKadosh Baruch Hu ba'atzmo shene'amar, vayomer al azvam et torati asher natati lifneihem. Because they abandoned the Torah. Okay, no, what's the chiddush? We knew that. They did everything under the sun. There was nothing they didn't do. Okay, they were about Azar and Gilead Arayis and Shevilas Damim and no Shemitah, no Shabbos. I mean, look at these guys had it coming. So what was it that the Chachamim didn't know and the Nevi'im didn't know, and God had to tell them? Well, what kind of thing is that? I mean, read the Navi. Oh, maybe they were in Shalavim and they didn't study the Navi. I don't know, but read the Navi and you'll know exactly what's going on. So what is? So the Gemara then adds an outrageous statement, really incredible. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. What did God mean to say? Shelo berchu b'Torah tefila. Before they learned, they didn't say Birkas HaTorah. That's it. That's it. Apparently, that's it. So what was that? What is that?
They didn't appreciate the source.
Exactly. They treated it like davar shel mabakach. They treated the Torah like it's like Solon's laws, or it's the Hammurabi or something similar. And this is ours. This is yours. And we're all happy together. No, when you make the act. Rav Soloveitchik said this all the time. It's wonderful. In fact, I recommend it very, very highly. And I'm sure it's in the Beis Medrash or in the library. In Shiur L'Zecher Abba Mari, the 2 volumes of Yortzeit Shurim that were published, that the Rav gave in memory of his father. One of the drushes is about Birkas HaTorah, and he says the act among the other things that Birkat HaTorah does. Yes, it's true. It's like a Birkas Hanenim in the sense that it's like a Birkat Hanenim in the sense that you shouldn't enjoy Torah. You shouldn't have any. It's like eating something. You shouldn't You have to say Baruch Preis before you have an apple. So you shouldn't come close to the Torah until you thank God for giving the Torah. Fine, but it's also an act of Kabbalah Zalmach Shamayim. I accept the discipline. I accept the wisdom, and I accept the source that this is God gave us this Torah. Everything, yes, it's true. It was interpreted by man because God authorized Chazal and Chachmei HaMasorah to interpret the Torah. Ultimately, it goes back to Him, and I give deference to Him first. So that's an act of worship, an act of service. So that the act of all right. So let's go backwards. So therefore, the act of Talmud. That's where the connection between Kabbalah Zalmach Shamayim and V'dibarta Bam comes. Yeah, they picked V'yahavta and Shema because it's obvious. But built into the act of learning Torah is an act of Kabbalah Zalmach Shamayim. You don't do it. Do they in England? When I was a kid, they used to do this in America. But you would pledge allegiance to the flag before class. Okay, you don't think God bless, like God save the King. Okay, but the point is, that's what this is. And nobody, historically speaking, there is no other religion that I know of. There is no other religion that I know of, and I've studied a fair number. There's no other religion where study is not only a religious duty, but it's a religious duty that devolves in every single member of the religion. Every other religion has a priestly caste, and they learn. The priests, the monks, the nuns, I don't know. The ulama in Islam, the learned caste. The only religion in which Talmud Torah is what's called the Grundnorm, the basic norm, the basic obligatory form, but one of the two basic obligatory forms of worship is Judaism. All right, let's go back. Ma Talmud Lomar. Why does the Torah have to go out and tell you that you will gather up your grain? Lefi shene'amar lo yamush sefer Torah ze mipicha yachol dvarim kichtavam. When Yeshua comes to is ready to attack Yericho. So in the second parak, I think an angel comes to, or third parak, an angel comes to Yeshua, and he said, in the first parak, God says to Yeshua, Lo yamush sefer Torah ze mipicha. You'll constantly be involved in learning. Torah should not move, not an inch from you. Okay. Now, is that a bracha, or is that a command? Says the Gemara, Yachol dvarim tiktavam. Yachol, is it possible that we take this literally? Talmud Lomar v'asavta deganecha. You also have to go and harvest your food. You also have to harvest your food, and you have to provide for your family, and so on. Now, is that a matir? Is that a mitzvah? All right, we can discuss it. Hanheg bahem derech eretz. That doesn't mean just be. It could also mean be a mensch. In other words, no. Hanheg bahem derech eretz. You got to live in this. As my mother-in-law would say, you got to live in this world. Divrei Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who was known as a bit of an extremist. No. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai Omer, wait a minute. If you go into business, the business is going to eat you. You could be a slave of your business, just like whatever. אפשר אדם חורש בשעת חרישה, וזורע בשעת זריעה, וקוצר בשעת קצירה, ודש בשעת דישה. That sounds like something like Agada. וזורע בשעת הרוח. What's זריעה? Do you know what that is? So that's when you throw up the after you cut the heads off of the wheat, you sew it up so that the chaff separates from the kernels. Torah matzeilech. If you're going to be doing all your time making a living, because agriculture, being a farmer is a full-time job. Excuse me. The truth of the matter is that anything is a full-time job. Well, that's actually not true. Up until the 20th century, the truth is, business was not 24/7 or 24/6. You could be open certain hours and learn. There were plenty of proof of that. Today it's not. Today it's whatever. Anyways, Torah matzeh eleh. Ella, says Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, bizman sheYisrael osim ritzono shel makom, melachtan naaseit al yedei acherim. If we're zoicha, so the goyim. I'm assuming you're talking about the goyim. It could also mean, well, I don't know. Okay? ובזמן שאין ישראל עושים רצונו של מקום, מלאכתה נעשית על ידי עצמם, שנאמר, ואספת דגניך. In other words, ואספת דגניך is what? It's if you have to. It's a begrudging allowance. It might also be a punishment. It's not. Reb Shimon Yochai is pretty extreme in this formulation. What?
I've had the punishment.
Okay. I mean, like I said, it could be either. It's not pshuto shel mikra. But anyways, you have to work for other people. Okay. So here you have it. You have the earlier Gemara. You had the Medrash over here in Medrash Tillim. Kol mi she'osek b'Torah Kadosh Baruch Hu oseh lo chapatzav shene'amar ki b'Torat Hashem chetzo. Okay, how we have no time. So one answer to that question is depends. If you're worthy, you won't have to work. The ideal is not to work. The ideal is that that other people will finance you.
If you were really studying, then you would have time.
Right, exactly. Amar Abaye, who comments. I don't think he's paskening here, but he comments. Harabei asuk Rabbi Yishmael, val tabi adam. There were plenty of people who made time for learning, and they made time for running their farm or whatever it is, and they succeeded. Ki Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai v'lo al tabi adam. It's not realistic. It's not realistic. Now, it's not just at this point of contention. Are you saying that this is not that all this stuff that everybody's talking about today is not new? Okay, this contention, this point of contention between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, it's not just those two. Okay, in the time of the Amoraim, at least, there was a community that was known as the Kahala Kadisha de Yerushalayim. The Kahala Kadisha de Yerushalayim, it's not clear if they lived in Yerushalayim or not, because after Churban Abayit, and certainly after the fall of Beitar and the destruction the destruction of Beitar and the defeat of Bar Kokhba, Jews were generally not allowed to live in Yerushalayim under the Romans and under the Byzantines after them. Maybe it might have just been like a reference to Yerushalayim out of longing, but either way, there was a group called the Kahal Kadosh of Yerushalayim, and according to the Medrash, in Kohelet Rabbah, these people were all Talmidim of Rabbi Meir, who's another Tana. Okay, they were all Talmidim of Rabbi Meir or followers of Rabbi Meir. Divided their days in thirds. What made them unique and holy was 1/3 of the day they davened. It doesn't mean they was all straight because they obviously davened 3 times a day. 1/3 of the day they learned, and 1/3 of the day they worked, which means that the Kahal Kadosh of Yerushalayim saw work as part of the divine plan. So part of the divine plan. It's more Rabbi Yishmael than certainly Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. But there's certainly this idea that you should basically. Well, this is from the guy that hid in the cave. I mean, he didn't want to be in the cave, but he was in the cave. Okay, so that's so. So in between the lines of this Medrash Tillim already, you have this other machlokas. All right, but the Gemara is talking about learning. By the way, a friend of mine who now lives in Beit Shemesh. Told me once that, no, I'm sorry. Wasn't he? I had who's from Boston? Okay, so, do you know the Feuersteins? Feuersteins in Boston.
From where?
They're from Brookline. Most of the family is not there. The one who everybody knew is Aaron Feuerstein, who was the one who had a mill and it burned down, and he paid the workers out of his own pocket while they were rebuilding the mine. All right, they were.
Is it a Maimonides family?
What?
Is it a Maimonides family?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh, so it's probably like a historical Maimonides family.
It's a historical Maimonides family. Yeah. Most of the members of the family I don't think live there anymore. One son does, but in any case, not important.
Right.
Wonderful family. There was another brother. There was Aaron who owned his mill. There was another brother who lived. His name was Moses Feuerstein. He was more of a public figure. He was active in the community. He was president of the OU. He had a son who was a very dear friend of mine, Rabbi Mordechai Feuerstein, who was a Rav in Jersey for a while, and he was in Vancouver as well. Yeah, you were in Vancouver, right?
I think I went to go visit him with Frisch.
Okay. So Rabbi Feuerstein was a very dear friend, and especially at a time when I needed eitzes and chizuk and stuff like that, he was very. He helped me a lot. In any case, We were once talking about the challenges of, because he was in the same doctoral program with me at Harvard, even though he didn't finish. I did, but he decided he didn't want to continue. We're talking about the size of the Torah and how can you ever manage to find yourself, even reach any kind of level of achievement or satisfaction in Talmud Torah. So he said to me that they once asked, so the story goes. They once asked the Chatam Sofer, how long did it take you to become a Gadol B'Torah? So some Sofer said, supposedly, 5 minutes. 5 minutes, yeah. Every 5 minutes I learned. So that, that fits nicely into this passage. All right, but the Medrash here comes up with other responses. What about, says, we have no time. Amar lahem HaKadosh Baruch Hu, ki kayamu mitzvat tefillin, u'ma'aleh ani aleichem ki'ilu atem yegiyim layla b'yom. Observe the mitzvah of tefillin, and I'll consider it as if you were learning all the time. Now that could mean two things. So they're always mean two things. Could mean that putting on tefillin will have a profound influence on your neshama. It could also, however, be only restricted to those days when they were tefillin all day. I'll take it one step further. Is it also to put on tefillin at night? We don't. In other words, is Lila? There's a whole back and forth thing about Menachos. Is Lila Zman tefillin or not?
No.
Yes. Lila is Zman tefillin. Officially, Lila you could put on tefillin. However, Chazal said don't take them off at the beginning of the day because you'll fall asleep and you might end up passing gas or whatever, and doing things that are inappropriate for while having tefillin on. Shabbos and Yontif, that's another story. Shabbos and Yontif are lav zman tefillin, so therefore there's no mitzvah, there's nothing. Okay? So I don't know. So if this Medrash is presuming that there were people that were wearing it 24 hours a day, so you're learning Torah is you're literally surrounding yourself, binding the Torah on you at all times. Now there's no intellectual activity that goes on while you're wearing tefillin. Right? On the other hand, it does certainly create your atmosphere. So in other words, the only way I can understand this Medrash is that way. In other words, when you're learning, what do we say? You are encountering God by learning. Tefillin contains what? The 4 passages that talk about tefillin, but also 2 passages of Kriya Shema, which are essentially passages of Talmud Torah. Follow? So therefore, it's part of, you get a partial kiyum. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Mikra Molehu. Okay? It's an open, we say it in Yiddish, often a pasuk. It's a straightforward verse. Vayalecha la'ot al yadcha l'zikaron b'neinecha l'mantia Torat Hashem beficha. Okay? Rabbi Yeshua says that's fine. About Masha Amar Rebbe Eliezer Pratu Leilot She'ein Mitzvat Tefillin Mekayemet Ela Bayom. So Rebbe Eliezer disagrees. He says no. He holds against how we paskin, that he thinks that there's no tefillin at night. Shenemar v'shamarte chuka azov miyamim yamima yamim v'lo leilot. Okay. Amar Rebbe Eliezer, if you're going to hold that there's no tefillin at night, mani mekayem b'torato yagem v'layla. How could you possibly have learning at day and night, and you have to make a living? What are you going to do? Amar le Rabbi Yoshua zo kriyat shema, she'im adam koreh oto shachrit v'arvit, ma'aleh alav hakadosh baruch hu ki'ilu yaga b'torah yomam v'layla. So, Kriya Shema, you're the minimum for Kriya Shema. We have time. The minimum for Kriya Shema, the minimum for Limud Torah is Kriya Shema morning and evening. As Korah Shemayim, you can whatever. But then the question becomes, okay, that's the minimum. Obviously, there's a maximum. Does the fact that there's a minimum for Talmud Torah open the possibility of learning something else at the expense of learning Torah in the narrow sense? Right, exactly. Skip down. That question did not escape Chazal because there were those who wanted to go. I mean, Chazal living in the most sophisticated society that there is. What?
No, one of the like Avichal said to send pictures of the Torah time class.
Okay, so take a picture.
So it just.
It's a we're making candid
I'm not gonna
shots.
take a photo, but I'll tell him. He knows I took it.
Okay. We'll continue this next time, but count up at the end of this passage 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay? Sha'alu et Rabbi Yoshua, the same Rabbi Yoshua. They asked him, Mahu shilmod, or yilamed, et beno chochmat yivanit. Let's assume for the moment that means a general secular education. Amar lahem, he says, you can do that. Bisha she'eino lo min hayam v'lo min halayla. Shene'amar lo yamush sefer haTorah hazeh mipicha v'agita bo yomam v'layla. So Yeshua is saying, nothing doing. Okay? If you have free time, you learn. That's it. Amar lahem, he went on and said, Lo yilamed adam et beno afilu umanut. Don't teach a profession. Kedosh kedei shelo yibatel midivrei Torah, shene'amar uvacharta b'chayim. Anything other than Torah is not chayim. Now, obviously, that doesn't go with Rabbi Yishmael, right? Because he says you should run your farm. So you're talking about there's a very strong tension around all these issues of where your priorities are, where your head's at, and it also impacts directly on your consciousness, not just how you go about when you learn. By the way, especially true among Hasidim, but there are many people who, if they take the time to go learn, they wash their hands first. Now, generally, people wash their hands when? Before they daven and before they eat. Before they eat for a totally different reason. But before davening. Because the act of learning is an act of avoda. It also it's like mincha also. It takes you out of your normal sort of quotidian sort of routine and rhythm to do something else. All right, we will continue this next time.